Everyone in the room thought the heir was taking his medicine. Only Martina White knew he was drinking his death. The spoon was already at his lips. The poison was already active. And if she was wrong, she wouldn't leave this room breathing. So, she did the one thing no caretaker is allowed to do. She knocked the spoon from his hand. The silver clattered against the mahogany table. The viscous green liquid pooled on the pristine cloth, hissing softly against the metal. The room didn't just go quiet. It went dead. 10 men in black suits froze, hands instinctively moving toward concealed weapons. Uncle Minho's face twisted from composed advisor to something feral. And Cho Yi-jun, the pale heir who sat at the head of the table like a dying prince, slowly turned his hollow gaze toward her. Martina didn't see the spoon hit the floor. She didn't hear the liquid splash. She only saw the bubble. That single, microscopic fizz that medicine doesn't make. The reaction to silver that only a combat medic turned caretaker, someone who'd spent 20 years in emergency wards watching people die from things that looked harmless, would recognize. Not because she was brave. Not because she had a plan. Because she was trained to see death before it struck. That's not medicine. Her voice cracked through the silence like a gunshot. The words hung in the air, dangerous and irreversible. She'd just accused a family elder of attempted murder. In front of witnesses. In front of the heir. In a room where servants didn't speak unless spoken to, where outsiders didn't question tradition, where a black woman in a caretaker's uniform had no voice, no authority, no right to exist beyond her function. And suddenly, every gun in the room was pointed at her. If you're still watching right now, you're one of the few who actually care. Most people would have scrolled. If this story has you hooked, don't stay silent. Like the video. Now, let's get back to the moment Martina's life became a countdown. Yi-jun's hand hovered in the air where the spoon had been. His pale fingers trembled, not from weakness, Martina realized now, but from months of systematic poisoning. The dark circles under his eyes, the gaunt hollows in his cheeks, the way he moved like a ghost in his own body. He wasn't sick. He was being erased. "You spilled my cure," Yi-jun whispered, his voice barely audible. Uncle Minho's chair scraped back. "Seize her. She's hysterical. She's attacked a family elder." But Martina didn't run. She couldn't, because between her and the door stood a wall of black suits and dead eyes. Because Yi-jun was still looking at her with that hollow, confused expression, a man who'd been told he was dying for so long he'd stopped questioning it. Because every instinct she had as a healer was screaming that if she didn't prove it right now, this second, they'd both be dead by morning. She stepped forward instead of back. Placed her body between Yi-jun and the men closing in. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steel. "Look at the spoon, sir. Look at the silver." Where the green liquid had touched the ornate silver spoon, the metal was turning black. Not tarnished. Not stained. Chemically reacting. Sulfur compounds. Arsenic. The kind of poison that killed slowly, that mimicked wasting disease, that let a family claim their heir died of natural causes while they carved up his empire behind his back. The room stared at the blackening metal. Science doesn't lie. Bodies do. Tradition does. Family does. But chemistry? Chemistry just is. The spoon hit the marble floor with a sharp metallic ring that seemed to echo forever. Green liquid arced through the air in slow motion, droplets catching the amber light from the crystal chandelier before splattering across the white tablecloth like toxic rain. The cloth hissed where the liquid touched it, tiny wisps of acrid smoke curling upward. Martina's arm was still extended, her hand trembling from the force of the strike, her chest heaving as the reality of what she'd just done crashed over her like ice water. "That's not medicine." The words tore from her throat, raw and desperate, shattering the cultivated silence of the room. Uncle Minho jerked backward, his carefully composed mask cracking into something ugly. His hand, the one that had been holding the spoon with such gentle paternal care, now hung in the air, fingers curled like claws. For a fraction of a second, Martina saw it, pure, undiluted rage flickering behind his eyes before he schooled his features back into shock and indignation. The sound of 10 weapons being drawn happened simultaneously, a chorus of metal on leather that made Martina's blood turn to ice. Guns appeared from shoulder holsters, from waistbands, from jacket linings. Black steel glinted in the low light. Every barrel pointed at her center mass. Professional. Efficient. Executionary. The room didn't just freeze, it calcified. The air itself seemed to solidify, pressing down on Martina's shoulders until she could barely breathe. One of the guards, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, had his finger on the trigger. She could see the micro-tension in his hand, the way his jaw clenched, waiting for the order. 3 pounds of pressure. That's all it would take. 3 pounds and she'd be a red stain on Italian marble. But the order didn't come. Cho Yi-jun sat at the head of the table like a porcelain doll, perfectly still. He hadn't flinched when Martina struck the spoon, hadn't gasped when the liquid spilled, hadn't moved when 10 guns filled the space between them. He simply sat there, hands resting on the armrests of his chair, his pale face expressionless in a way that was more unsettling than any show of emotion could have been. Then slowly, so slowly it seemed choreographed, he turned his head toward her. The movement was mechanical, disconnected, like a puppet on strings being manipulated by an unseen hand. His eyes, dark and sunken in deep hollows, found hers. There was no anger in them, no fear, no recognition of the chaos erupting around him. Just a vast, empty exhaustion that made Martina's heart clench despite the guns still trained on her skull. "You spilled my cure," he whispered. His voice was barely audible, thread-thin and brittle, like it might snap if he pushed too hard. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact delivered with the flat effect of someone who'd stopped caring about facts months ago. "She is hysterical." Minho's voice exploded into the silence like a bomb. He surged to his feet, his chair scraping back violently, his finger jabbing toward Martina like a knife. "She has attacked a family elder. In front of witnesses. Take her out. Take her out now." The guns shifted, safeties clicking off. Martina's ears rang with the sound. She could smell gun oil and expensive cologne and her own fierce sweat soaking through her uniform. This was it. This was the moment. They were going to drag her into a basement somewhere and she would disappear, another foreign worker who quit without notice, another nobody who nobody would look for. But then her training kicked in. Not her caretaker training, her combat medic training. The training that had gotten her dishonorably discharged and blacklisted and forced to take whatever work she could get in foreign countries where her past didn't follow her. The training that said, when you're already dead, you've got nothing left to lose. Martina stepped forward instead of back. The guards tensed. One of them actually jerked his gun upward, startled by the movement. But Martina ignored them. She moved directly into their line of fire, placing her body between Yi-jun and the wall of black suits closing in from both sides. Her hands came up, not in surrender, but in the universal gesture of a medical professional, steady, authoritative, demanding attention. "It's not a cure." Her voice was stronger now, cutting through Minho's sputtering rage. "Look at your hands, sir." Yi-jun blinked slowly, the first real sign of awareness crossing his features. He looked down at his hands where they rested on the chair arms. They were shaking, fine tremors running through his fingers, making them dance against the leather. "The tremors," Martina continued, her words coming faster now, fueled by adrenaline and the certain knowledge that she had maybe 30 seconds before someone decided to shoot first and ask questions later. "The blindness in the mornings when you first wake up. The night sweats that soak through your sheets. The metallic taste in your mouth that toothpaste doesn't touch. The way your hair comes out in the shower." Yi-jun's eyes widened fractionally. His gaze snapped from his hands to her face. "That's not chemotherapy," Martina said, her voice dropping to something urgent and intimate, like she was the only person in the room with him. "That's arsenic and hemlock. That's chronic poisoning. That's what I saw on that spoon. A neurotoxin reacting with the silver. Medicine settles. Sir. Poison breathes. The room held its breath. Even Minho had gone silent, though his face had drained of color, leaving 2 spots of red high on his cheekbones. Yijun stared at Martina for what felt like an eternity. His mouth opened slightly. The doctors said. The doctors told you what they were paid to tell you, Martina interrupted, knowing she was signing her death warrant with every word but unable to stop. You don't have a genetic wasting disease. You're not dying of some mysterious condition they can't name. You're being murdered. Slowly. Systematically. By someone who wants you weak enough to control but not dead enough to investigate. She saw it happen. The exact moment the fog lifted from his eyes. The exact second the passive resignation cracked and something sharp and dangerous peeked through underneath. Cho Yi-jun, the heir to a criminal empire, had spent months believing he was a victim of fate. The relief of discovering it was actually betrayal, something he understood, something he could fight, was almost palpable. But before he could speak, Minho laughed. It was a rich, condescending sound that filled the room like poisonous gas. He shook his head slowly, his expression shifting from shock to pity to barely concealed contempt. This is absurd. Yijun, please. She is an ignorant nurse. A foreign caretaker with a community college certificate. This, he gestured dismissively at the spoon still lying on the floor, the green liquid still hissing softly on the tablecloth. This is traditional herbal medicine from the mountains. Prepared by monks. The same formula your grandfather used. The same formula that has kept this family strong for 4 generations. He turned the full force of his attention on Martina, and she felt the weight of it like a physical blow. Minho had dead eyes. The kind of eyes that had watched people die without flinching. The kind of eyes that knew exactly how many ways a human body could break. Who are you, he said slowly, each word dropping like a stone into still water, to question centuries of tradition. You, who have been here for 3 months. You, who do not speak our language, do not understand our culture, do not belong in this room. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something soft and venomous. You are help, Miss White. Hired help. You change bedpans and measure pills and exist only because we allow it. And now you have assaulted a respected elder, caused a scene in front of witnesses, and attempted to poison the young master's mind with conspiracy theories. He turned back to Yi-jun, his expression smoothing into concern. She is clearly unstable. Perhaps the stress of the position has been too much for her. We should have her removed quietly, get you a proper caretaker who understands the importance of... If it's traditional medicine, Martina cut in, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, then it won't hurt you to drink it. Minho's mouth snapped shut. His eyes narrowed to slits. You said it's safe, Martina continued, riding the wave of reckless momentum. You said it's been used for generations. You said I'm just a hysterical foreign nurse who doesn't understand. So prove it. Drink the spilled liquid. Or better yet, she pointed to the ornate bottle still sitting on the side table, its contents glowing faintly green in the light. Pour yourself a fresh spoon. Show us all how wrong I am. The silence that followed was suffocating. Minho's face did something complicated. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His hands, which had been gesturing so expressively, curled into fists at his sides. For just a moment, Martina saw calculation flash across his features. Cold, rapid, mathematical. Then he smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Martina had ever seen. Of course, Minho said smoothly. If it will put this ridiculous matter to rest, if it will prove that you have made a dangerous mistake and wasted everyone's time. He moved toward the side table where the bottle sat, his movements unhurried and confident. I will drink it myself, and then we will discuss what happens to caretakers who assault their employers. Martina's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on forcing his hand that she hadn't thought 3 moves ahead. Of course he'd agree to drink it. Of course he'd call her bluff. Because he had options she didn't. An antidote already in his system. A fake bottle he could swap in. A dozen ways to make her look like a fool before he made her disappear. Her eyes darted to the tablecloth where the spilled liquid still pooled, eating slowly through the silk threads. That was the real poison. That was the proof. But how could she test it? How could she prove what it was before Minho staged his little performance and turned the entire room against her? Minho picked up the bottle with a flourish, retrieved a fresh silver spoon from the table setting, made a show of uncorking the bottle and pouring a careful measure of the viscous green liquid. It looked identical to what had spilled, moved the same way. But Martina's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The color was fractionally different, less luminous, more like actual herbal medicine and less like chemical death. He'd switched it, or he had an antidote, or both. Wait, Martina said, her voice cracking. Not that bottle. Test what spilled. Test what you were actually feeding him. Minho raised an eyebrow, the spoon halfway to his lips. The spilled medicine? The puddle on the tablecloth that has been contaminated by dirt and fabric and who knows what else? Don't be absurd. If you want a fair test. The spoon, Martina interrupted, the pieces clicking together in her mind with sudden, perfect clarity. Look at the spoon. The one on the floor. Look at what the liquid did to the silver. Every eye in the room turned to the floor where the original spoon lay. The silver that had been bright and polished when Uncle Minho lifted it to Yi Jun's lips. The silver that should still be bright and polished if it had only touched harmless herbal medicine. But it wasn't. The bowl of the spoon, where the green liquid had pooled for those few seconds before Martina struck it away, had turned completely black. Not tarnished. Not stained. Transformed. The chemical reaction was still happening, creeping up the handle like spreading rot, turning precious metal into something dark and corroded. Silver reacts to sulfur compounds, Martina said quietly, her voice steady now despite the tremor in her hands. To arsenic. To certain alkaloids. It's a test we used in field medicine when we suspected poisoning but didn't have lab access. Drop silver into a toxic substance and it tells you the truth in seconds. Science doesn't lie, Uncle Minho. It doesn't care about tradition or hierarchy or whose family has been in power for how long. It just is. She turned to Yi Jun, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. That spoon was in your mouth 3 times a day for months, wasn't it? That same silver spoon, part of a set, because tradition demands it. And you never noticed it turning dark because they replaced it constantly. Fresh silver. Clean silver. So you'd never see the evidence of what they were feeding you. Yi Jun's face had gone from pale to paper white. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles had disappeared. He was staring at the blackened spoon like it was a venomous snake coiled on his floor. Minho-ya, he said softly, and there was something new in his voice. Something that made every guard in the room stand up a little straighter. Why is the spoon black? Minho's face went through a series of transformations in the space of 3 seconds. Shock. Calculation. Rage. Then something worse. Desperation. The mask he'd worn so carefully, the concerned uncle, the loyal advisor, the keeper of traditions, cracked down the middle and fell away like shattered porcelain. It's a reaction to the heat. His voice pitched higher, losing its smooth authority. The metal is cheap. Modern manufacturing, not like the old silver. It oxidizes when exposed to. That's a lie, Martina said flatly. That's sterling silver. Part of a set that probably costs more than I make in a year. And oxidation doesn't happen in 30 seconds. Chemical reaction does. Minho's hand moved. It was subtle, just a slight gesture, but Martina had spent enough time in war zones to recognize a signal when she saw one. 2 of the guards shifted, their weapons rising fractionally, realigning their aim from defensive positions to execution stances. Kill the witch. Minho's voice cracked like a whip, all pretense of civility abandoned. She poisoned the spoon. She's an assassin. She came here to destroy this family and turn nephew against uncle with foreign lies. Shoot her. The guard's fingers tightened on triggers. But they didn't fire. Martina watched it happen in real time, the hesitation that rippled through the wall of black suits like a wave. Eyes darting sideways to each other. Minute shifts in stance. The kind of fractional pause that comes when soldiers receive contradictory orders from competing authority figures. These men were professionals. They'd been hired to protect the Cho family, specifically Cho Yi-jun, the heir to the empire. They'd sworn oaths, likely in blood, to serve him above all else. But they'd also been taking regular payments from Uncle Min-ho, the man who ran operations while the heir was sick. The man who signed their checks. The man who had the real power. One guard, the scarred one who'd been so ready to shoot Martina moments before, had his gun trained on her center mass. But his eyes weren't on her. They were on Yi-jun, waiting, watching for a signal that would tell him which master to obey. The room balanced on a knife's edge. One word from Yi-jun could save her, or condemn her. But he hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. He was still staring at the blackened spoon with an expression that Martina couldn't read, somewhere between horror and fury and something that looked almost like relief. Yi-jun, Minho said, his voice dropping back to something soft and paternal, a last desperate attempt to regain control. You're confused. The illness, it makes thinking difficult. This woman has manipulated you, planted seeds of doubt in a sick mind. Let me handle this. Let me take care of everything, like I always have. You need to rest. You need your medicine. The weakness wasn't my body failing, Yi-jun said quietly. His voice was still thin, still weak, but there was something underneath it now. Something hard and sharp that had been buried under months of systematic poisoning. He raised his head slowly, his dark eyes moving from the spoon to his uncle's face. The fog in my mind. The tremors. The way I couldn't remember conversations from one day to the next. The way I stopped caring about the business, about the territories, about father's legacy. His words came faster, stronger, as pieces clicked into place. You told me it was the disease. You told me I needed to focus on healing, let you handle operations. You told me the medicine would make me better, that I just needed to be patient, that I just needed to trust you. He stood up. It wasn't a smooth movement. Yi-jun's legs shook. His hands gripped the edge of the table for support. For a moment Martina thought he might collapse, that months of poison had weakened him too much for his rage to sustain him. But he locked his knees, straightened his spine, and stood at his full height for the first time since Martina had been hired 3 months ago. It was my family killing me, he finished, and his voice was no longer weak at all. Min-ho took a step backward. Yi-jun, please, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. Yi-jun's hand moved across the table, not toward the bottle of fake medicine, but toward the dinner setting that had been laid out before the meeting. His fingers closed around the steak knife, 10 inches of German steel with a weighted handle. He lifted it slowly, holding it up to the light so every person in the room could see it. I understand that you thought I was soft, that I was too Western, too educated, too reluctant to do what needed to be done, that you told Mother I would destroy the family business with my progressive ideas and my refusal to follow the old ways. Min-ho's face had gone gray. How did you? You think I was completely gone? Yi-jun let out a laugh that had no humor in it. You think the poison made me deaf as well as weak? I heard you. Late-night meetings in the study. Phone calls you thought I was too sick to notice. Just a few more months, you told them. He'll pass naturally, and then we can install someone more suitable. Someone you could control. Someone who would let you run the empire while they played figurehead. The knife trembled in his hand, but his eyes were steady, fixed on his uncle with a kind of cold fury that Martina recognized from soldiers who'd been betrayed by their own command. The most dangerous kind of anger, the kind that had moved past heat into ice. Anyone who touches her, Yi-jun said softly, his gaze sweeping across the guards, across Min-ho, across every person in that room, answers to me. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and absolute. The guards' weapons lowered fractionally. Not holstered, they weren't stupid, but no longer aimed at Martina's head. Safeties clicked back on. Fingers moved off triggers. The scarred guard actually took a step backward, creating distance between himself and Min-ho, a visible declaration of whose authority he recognized. "You're making a mistake," Min-ho hissed, his composure completely shattered now, his face twisted into something ugly. "You're weak. You've always been weak. Your father knew it. Your mother knows it. Why do you think they approved this? You were going to destroy everything our family built. You were going to destroy it." Yi-jun's voice cut through the tirade like a blade. "Or change it. Make it legitimate. Move into businesses that don't require us to disappear people in the night. That's what terrified you, isn't it, uncle? Not that I'd fail. That I'd succeed. That I'd make this empire clean and you'd lose your playground." He turned to the guards, and despite the tremor in his legs, despite the way his free hand gripped the table to stay upright, there was no mistaking the authority in his voice. "Take him." Min-ho's eyes went wide. "You can't. They're loyal to me. But the guards were already moving. The scarred one and another man, tall and expressionless, stepped forward in perfect synchronization. They didn't draw weapons. Didn't need to. Min-ho was in his 50s, soft from years behind a desk. When he tried to run, they caught him in 3 steps. "No. You don't understand." Min-ho thrashed in their grip, his carefully styled hair falling across his forehead, his expensive suit jacket tearing at the shoulder. "Your mother sanctioned this. She knows you're not strong enough. If you kill me, if you move against the family, Then I'll deal with mother next," Yi-jun said quietly, and the absolute certainty in his voice made even Martina's blood run cold. The guards dragged Min-ho toward the door. He was still screaming, still thrashing, but the fight was performance now. He knew it was over. They all knew it. The moment Yi-jun had stood up, the moment he'd picked up that knife, the power structure had shifted irrevocably. "The basement," Yi-jun said as they reached the doorway. "Hold him there. No communication with anyone. Strip his phone, his watch, everything. I want a full audit of every account he controls, every payment he's authorized in the last 6 months. And someone call Dr. Kim, the real one, not the one Uncle Min-ho hired. Tell him I need a full toxicology screen and chelation therapy. Tonight." The guards nodded and disappeared through the door, Min-ho's protests fading down the hallway. The remaining guards stood in a semicircle, weapons holstered now, waiting. The tension had drained from the room like water from a broken dam, leaving behind a strange, hollow quiet. Martina realized she was still standing in front of Yi-jun's chair, her body positioned between him and threats that were no longer there. Her legs felt like water. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Yi-jun set the knife down carefully on the table, then gripped the edge with both hands. For a moment Martina thought he was going to issue another order, assert his authority over the remaining guards. Instead, his knees buckled. She moved without thinking, trained reflexes overriding exhaustion. Her hands caught his elbow, his shoulder, taking his weight as he collapsed back into the chair. He didn't fight her support, just let himself sink into the leather, his head falling back, eyes closing. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his pulse visible in his throat. "Everyone out," Martina said, not looking away from Yi-jun's pale face. When nobody moved, she snapped. "Now. Your boss needs medical attention and about 8 witnesses fewer than he currently has. Out." The guards looked at each other, then at Yi-jun. He managed a weak gesture that might have been agreement or might have been dismissal. Either way, they filed out silently, closing the door behind them with a soft click that seemed too quiet for what had just happened. Alone in the room, Martina finally let herself breathe. Her hands found Yi-jun's wrist automatically, checking his pulse. thready but steady. His skin was clammy, cold to the touch. Classic signs of shock and systematic poisoning. He needed 4 fluids, chelation therapy, probably a blood transfusion. He needed a real hospital with real doctors, not whatever compromised medical staff had been filing false reports for months. "You should have let them shoot me," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. "Would have been simpler." Simpler isn't always right. Yijun's eyes opened, focusing on her face with difficulty. "You saved my life. I knocked a spoon out of someone's hand. Basic combat medic instinct. Don't thank me yet. If that poison has been building up for months, the damage might be permanent. Arsenic affects the nervous system, the liver, the kidneys. Hemlock causes paralysis. You're going to need serious treatment, and even then, you knew you'd die if you were wrong," he interrupted. "You moved anyway. Put your body between me and the guards. That's not instinct. That's something else." Martina didn't know how to respond to that, so she focused on practical matters instead. "Do you trust Dr. Kim? The real one? With my life. He delivered me. Patched me up after my first fight. Told my father I was too smart to follow him into the business." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Father listened to exactly none of that advice." "Good. Because you need chelation therapy immediately and a full workup to see what other damage." "You're fired," Yijun said softly. Martina's hands stilled on his wrist. Of course. She'd overstepped catastrophically, assaulted a family member, caused a massive scene, exposed internal family politics. Of course she was fired. She'd probably be lucky if fired was all she got. "I understand. I'll pack my things." "You're fired as my caretaker," he continued, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. He was smiling. Actually smiling, despite the pallor, despite the tremors, despite everything. "Can't have my head of security changing my bedpans. Bad for the professional dynamic." Martina stared at him. "You're what? Head of security, personal protection, chief of medical oversight, whatever title makes you feel official." He shifted in his chair, wincing at the effort. "You think I trust anyone else to check my food now? Anyone else to watch my back? You stood between me and 10 guns because you couldn't turn off your healer's instinct. That's exactly the kind of irrational, self-sacrificing loyalty that I need around me if I'm going to clean house and survive what comes next. I'm a disgraced combat medic with a dishonorable discharge and a history of making terrible decisions," Martina said flatly. "I'm not bodyguard material. I'm not even good caretaker material, apparently, since I just orchestrated a family coup in your dining room." "You're alive material," Yijun countered. "And you kept me alive when everyone else was trying to kill me. That's the only qualification I care about right now." His eyes drifted to the blackened spoon still lying on the floor, evidence of betrayal that ran deeper than poison. "Besides, I'm going to need someone who knows how to see death before it strikes. Someone who doesn't care about tradition or hierarchy or family politics. Someone who'll knock the spoon away even if it costs them everything." He looked back at her, and despite the weakness, despite the months of poison eating away at his body, there was something fierce and unbroken in his gaze. "Start today. First order, make sure I survive the night. Second order, help me figure out who else in this organization is trying to kill me. Third order, teach me that silver test, because I'm going to need to check every meal, every drink, every gift that comes through my door for the next year." Martina should have said no. Should have walked away from this disaster of a family with their internal wars and their casual murder and their complete dysfunction. Should have gotten on the next plane back to anywhere else and never looked back. Instead, she heard herself say, "I'm going to need an actual medical facility. Not just a bedroom with an 4-stand. Real equipment, real monitoring, and complete veto power over anyone who comes near you with food, medicine, or helpful suggestions." "Done." And hazard pay. A lot of hazard pay. Because apparently your family's idea of succession planning involves slow-acting neurotoxins. Done. And if your mother is actually behind this, if this goes higher than Uncle Min-ho, I'm not taking a bullet for corporate politics. I'll keep you alive, but I'm not dying for your empire. Yi-jun's smile widened fractionally. Fair. Though I suspect you'd take the bullet anyway. You can't help yourself. He was probably right, which annoyed her more than she wanted to admit. Martina straightened, her hands falling away from his wrist, her spine snapping back into something approaching professional posture despite the adrenaline crash threatening to take her knees out from under her. Then I guess my first act as head of security is to get you into a proper medical facility before the collation window closes. You've got maybe 6 hours before permanent organ damage becomes inevitable. Can you walk, or do I need to carry you? My pride says I can walk. My legs say you're going to need to at least support my weight. He held out a hand, and she took it, pulling him carefully to his feet. He swayed but stayed upright, his arm draping across her shoulders in a position that would have been unconscionably improper 3 minutes ago, but was now apparently her job. They made it 3 steps toward the door before Yi-jun paused, looking back at the table. At the blackened spoon. At the puddle of green liquid still eating slowly through the silk tablecloth. At the evidence of how close he'd come to dying in expensive comfort, surrounded by family, with nobody to save him but a foreign caretaker who couldn't turn off her conscience. Thank you, he said quietly. For the spoon. For the guns. For all of it. Martina adjusted her grip on his waist, taking more of his weight as they started moving again. Don't thank me yet. Surviving your uncle was the easy part. Surviving the chelation therapy and whatever political nightmare comes after is going to be significantly harder. Then it's good I hired the best. You hired the only one stupid enough to say yes. Same thing, in my experience. They made it to the door, out into the hallway where guards stood at attention, their faces carefully neutral as they watched their boss lean heavily on his newly promoted head of security. Made it to the elevator, down to the underground garage, into an armored car that probably cost more than Martina's childhood home. Made it to a private medical facility that Yi-jun assured her was clean, uncompromised, staffed by people loyal to him and not to whoever else in his family tree wanted him dead. And through it all, Martina's hands didn't stop shaking. Because she'd gambled everything, her life, her sanity, her basic survival instinct, on a split-second recognition of poison fizzing on a silver spoon. Because she'd stood between a Mafia heir and the guns of his own guards based on nothing but 20 years of emergency room experience and a compulsion to save patients that had already destroyed her career once. Because somewhere in the chaos of the last hour, she'd stopped being invisible help and become something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something essential. Something that couldn't walk away even if she wanted to. The car pulled up to the medical facility, and Martina helped Yi-jun through the doors into the hands of Dr. Kim, who took one look at his patient's pallor and started barking orders to nurses about chelation protocols and 4 lines. They disappeared into an examination room, leaving Martina alone in a sterile white hallway, still wearing her caretaker's uniform with its white collar and apron, still smelling of fierce sweat and adrenaline, still alive against all reasonable odds. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Welcome to the inner circle. Don't let the next chapter of this empire pass you by. She stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it and turned off her phone. Whatever came next. Mother's response, the family's retaliation, the inevitable power struggle for control of the organization, she'd face it when it came. For now, she had a patient to keep alive and a new job that would probably get her killed. But at least this time, she'd see death coming. At least this time, she'd knock the spoon away. You stayed till the end. Most people don't. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe, because stories like this only survive when people support them.